Hey, how's it going guys? My name's Daniel, aka HashLips. Welcome back to the series where we are now going to implement the rarity structure. Now, in this previous video of this series, you guys have seen how we can create a lot of artworks simply by adding your layers to a file that contains numerous different layers such as these. When you then implement these on the layers, or when you've added your folders into the layers folder, and you've organized your layers in order over there, and you ran a simple command, you saw that you could build numerous different images, like so. I think this is pretty cool, and a lot of you were sad to know that I took out the rarities for this edition. Now, the reason why I took out the rarities are because it wasn't done in a way that I loved. When I talk about that, I mean that it was okay, it did do its job, but at the end of the day, we want the best of the best. So, I've gone ahead and implemented a way that I prefer to do things, and that is the proper way. I researched the best way of how to get rarity weights inside our program. And yes, I am calling this our program. The reason for that is because we have all worked so hard on continuing this learning journey. Stick around and I'll show you how we're going to put back the rarities and the weights in a much better way, and that's easier for you guys to maintain. So let's get down to it. In the previous version, all you had to do was add your attributes, basically your layers, into the layers folder, and then just make sure that the spelling is correct with the names according to the folder names. And then in here, you organized it from the layers going first in and last out. That's all you had to do. And once your attributes was in these folders, you could have just basically gone down here after you've installed Node and ran the installations. You could just run node space index.js. After running that, based on your configuration on how many elements you wanted to create, it would then create a build folder with all your new images. The problem with this approach was that the program wasn't configured to take in consideration any weights, any rarity types. Let's look at the updates that I've made for you guys so that it's just as easy to use, but way more efficient, way more faster, and pretty damn cool. So I hope you guys enjoy this. Let's go and check out the updates. This is the updated repo. Now, after this video, after the explanation, I'm going to show you how to exactly download it and use the program. First, I want to go through what's involved so that you guys, the code fundies out there, can get excited. I'm really excited for this because the way it chooses its attributes are quite unique. Anyway, it looks much the same as the previous one, but now if we run node.js, you'll see all these wonderful colors down here. But apart from that, it actually includes rarities. So these images over here won't be one the same and also have rare attributes based on weights. Now, in order for me to explain to you the weights, it's a simple process. The only basic thing that you will need to change is nothing in the program itself. It has to do with the layers folder. What do I mean by changing the layers folder? Well, let's open up the eye color, for instance. All you have to do now is, if you look at these file names, you'll notice that these file names each have a star and then a number after the star. This number is basically the weight that you want that attribute to carry. Weight meaning that how often would you like this attribute to show up in correspondence to all the other attributes. For an example, if I change the weight of the cyan eye color to 1, this would make it very rare. The reason for this is because the weight in comparison to the rest are like very small, right? Let's make the yellow one almost 100. Let's say this one is 50. let's say this weight over here is a small 5, and let's say this one, the pink one, would be, I don't know, 60. And then lastly, we'll leave that one at 10. We can automatically see that the yellow one is the most common attribute because it has a bigger weight. It means it's going to be rendered most of the time. The one with the smallest weight is the one that's the most rarest. Now you can make another weight that is 1 as well. And that's what makes it so amazing, this program. Previously, you couldn't have these weights being equal. You had to have it equal to 100, and now you don't. You can make the weights whatever you choose, right? And this gives us way more flexibility than the previous programs. If I'm you, I would stick to a convention. My convention is always to work this out kind of accordance to 100. So I would kind of say, cool, if it's 100% that this will be shown, not 100%, remember these are weights. It doesn't work with percentages. It works with actual weights. So let me explain it a bit better. So in order for us to truly understand what happens behind the code, we have to look at weighted random choices, and this is a perfect article that I found. When I found this article, I just got excited. Now, I don't know if that's weird, getting excited over code, but that's just how it is. So let's get on and let's read through this. Now, I'm not going to read the whole article, but I'm going to give you the gist of it. Basically, I've already implemented what we need from this. But I want you to understand something, and I also want to give credit to this article for actually making this possible and showing me a way where this is done. Now, think about it like this, right? We have got letters. Now, imagine in our case that we have our layer elements. Our layer elements consist of a name, an ID, and a weight. So imagine those objects each being inside this layer, right? In this array. Now, we also need weights. But like I explained, our object already carries the weight inside itself. Let's quickly go back to the code so I can explain to you. I will go through this code in depth, but before I do, I just want to quickly console.log something out so that you guys can see exactly what I'm talking about when I say our alphabet letters, so to speak, is the same as our weights. When we run our program, I can see that we actually got our objects. Now check it out. We got these objects instead of just a letter if we reference this. So imagine this A, B, and this B, and this C being each an object in our array, like so. So there's technically A, there's technically B, and there's C, all right? So you can see that each one of these objects has an ID, a name, a path, and a weight. And this weight over here technically is going to be our version of the separate weights array. So I just want you to understand that I've taken this concept and merged it together because this didn't fit my use case. So I decided to merge it together and basically use the same concept. How this all works then is when it comes to the time for us to select a random element, we go and check at the weights first. How do we do that? Well, we go and sum up each one of these. So we say 9 plus 2 plus 2 plus 4 plus 12, and we carry on like this, all right, through the whole array in our weights. So we add these weights up. So 60 plus 5 plus 50, all right? We carry on like that. Then what we do is, because all of the weights, for instance, in this example, will calculate to 102, it means that if you look at your first weight 9, it's basically saying that it's 9 proportions of 102. So here you can see they take the example of 12, okay, which would be 12 of 102, meaning that it has a bigger weight than all the rest of the numbers. I just want you guys to understand that concept. What happens next is quite cool. So we have a function that has the total weights. We loop through all of these weights to get the total, so we add each weight to the total. That's what I meant by calculating every one of these weights together. We get then a total, which in this case would be 102. Then we generate a random number based on the total weight. Remember, we had 100 in there. If we go to our code where we actually do that calculation, it's down here in this section. I'll go through the code on our side just now, but I just want you to understand their code, and then we'll come back to our code. All right. Perfect. So I just want to jump back quickly. Then once we have a random, we give it a loop to loop through all the elements basically. Remember, we don't have letters. We have all the elements together in objects. We then go ahead and take this random number that's been generated from the total and minus it by the current weight. We keep on doing this and looping and looping and doing this until we reach a number that is less than 0. If we reach that number, it means that that element will be our selected element. And in our case, we supply the ID for our DNA in this function below here, because it's in our create DNA. And we have to put it in our DNA so that we can check that it's also unique. So we actually return what is called the element ID, all right, which is perfectly fine. Once we have that, we can actually run this program and it will go and really select a weighted element based on that whole folder over here. And that's why you can see why some of these are, if it's lower numbers, it carries lower weights than the pink and the red and the yellow, because these are bigger weights. So it has nothing to do with a percentage out of 100. Keep that in mind. It all has to do with weights. And this allows us for adding as many elements as we want to, as little elements as we want to. Hell, we can only even have one element, and we don't have to make the weight 100. We can make the weight 1 because there's only one attribute, right? So it is always going to be called. So that's what I want you to understand when adding your weights. It doesn't have to be out of 100, but you can make it 100 to make it easier for yourself, or you can play around. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into this quickly through our code base so that you can understand. But if you want to read this article, I highly recommend it. It's a pretty cool article and you'll get great insight on what we are doing in this next version. Let's go through our code step by step so you can see the process taking place. Okay, so now let's look exactly what happens to the code so you understand it fully. I urge you guys to watch this to the very end so you know exactly how this is implemented, and also see at the very end how we're going to clone the repo and run your own files with the rarity weights. Let's go into the terminal, and you can press Command K on a Mac as a shortcut to clean your terminal. Next, let's look at the entry point of your app. When we look at the index.js, we can see that this is the two functions that gets called. We know that we have this build setup and the start creating. In the build setup, if we go to it, you can see that it pulls down from main.js, which is in here. So the first step that takes place is a build setup. What this does is, if we can just find it, there it is. What this does is basically it checks if this directory, if this build directory exists, it checks for it, and then if it does, it cleans it out. Otherwise, it goes and creates it anyway, right? That is something you need to understand. After that happens, that's why it doesn't matter if I even delete this build folder and I run the program. It doesn't matter if it's there or not, it will be created. The next step that takes place is it starts creating. So if we jump to the main.js file and we go into this file, you can see it's all the same code that we've been discussing as we were coding previously. But the changes that I've made that I want you to pay attention to is actually this. The fact that now when we check and create new DNA, this is actually the only place where it really changes. If we jump to this function, we can see that inside this layers, it comes in here and we pass the layers object, which is in turn these folders basically. It goes ahead and loops over each one. Then it has an empty array here at the top before it loops. It loops through each one. Then it goes and creates a total weight. Now, if you can recall, this is where the total weight and the code that comes from this article is implemented in. I just adapted it to fit our needs. But basically, it is the total weight. It loops through all the elements in the array and adds all those weights together. That's why in the log, you'll see that I've logged out the total weight. So I'm going to explain this now. But just understand it calculates the total weight over there, all right? And then in the logs, you'll see that the total weight of this one folder is 100. Like I said, you can choose whatever amount of numbers you want to work with. It will work with any amount. I just keep to 100 because it makes it easier for me to understand what weight it will carry. Then what happens is it goes and creates a random number out of that total weight. For instance, if the total weight is 100, it will put 100 in there, meaning that it will create a number between 0 actually and that total number, right? -1. But anyway, it will create this random number. And then what will happen is I print out that number. So down here in the console, you can see this was the total weight. This is the random number that was created. After that, we enter into a special loop where we subtract our element's weight, our current element's weight, from the random number. And we do this recursively until we find a random number that's equaling less than 0. All right? So here you can see for each layer, it does the same. It gets the total weight, finds a random number. It subtracts, it calculates the random number again. Then it subtracts that again, we're left with 3. Then it subtracts that again, and then we are left with -74, which means this is the ID that will get picked. This is just a special way for you guys to control weights that a random number should pick. It's a very interesting way, but indeed very special. Now, like you see, if I run this, you will see all these logs being logged out. I am not going to keep these logs in the code, seeing that it's cluttering the code base. So what I am going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove this. But if you've seen this video, you'll know exactly what I talk about, and you can put these back if you really want to. I'll leave these two descriptions just so you know exactly what's happening. But when we run the code, it should purely just do this to see what we have been creating. Lastly, I want to show you something. If you open the builds folder and you open, let's say, 1.json, I'm using Prettifier, so it automatically formats nicely like this. One thing that I want to mention is if you want to add to these attributes field, you can easily do so in the main.js and scroll up to the add metadata, and there you can add a bunch of attributes like compiler, attributes, the date, edition, image. Everything you see here is exactly created in this function. These are for the people who really want to modify their metadata for Solana or something like that. But guys, I really hope you enjoyed this. I want to show you now how to grab the code from GitHub and then actually implement it in your own, on your own with your own layers. So how do you use the rarity weight? And this is what you guys have been waiting for, but now that you understand everything, you'll feel comfortable in implementing this yourself. Go ahead and go to github.com/hashlips/hashlips art engine. Once you're on here, you can see we now have 2 tags. You can either click on these 2 tabs and see that there's 2 releases. The latest release that pertains to this video is version 1.0.1. If we go to the release and we go and check if we go back to the repo, and you can also click on the releases here on the right hand side, and you click and you select version 1.0.1. You can see if you go into the releases, you can see there is the previous one. If you scroll down, this is the previous video without the new rarities. And if you select this one, this has the rarities. So all you have to do is make sure that you download this source code .zip. Once you have done that, what you're going to do is you're going to drag this onto the desktop or wherever you want to put it. I'm now just dragging it onto my desktop into an empty folder, like so. I'm then going to go ahead and extract it so that I have access to it over here. Next, what you want to do is open your favorite code editor. Mine is Visual Studio Code. Make sure that you have Node.js installed or Yarn. And you can see the previous video to make sure you have those dependencies installed. But anyway, what you can do now is just go ahead, say File Open, go to your desktop. I've saved it under this folder. I just want to open the right folder. So you have to open your file structure. It should look like this. Once you have these, you can go ahead and simply go to the terminal. So you open a new terminal for your VS Code and you run npm install like so, or you can run yarn add all. I prefer yarn, like I always mention that. After all the dependencies are installed, give it a test run. In the terminal, run node index.js. A lot of people are having issues with that, so to make sure you have Node installed, first run node-v to see what's your version of Node. Mine is version 14.17. If it doesn't give you a version, you haven't installed Node yet. If you have, you can just run node index.js. Once you've done that, the program would start. It takes a little bit of a while the first time, but once it gets running, it's very fast. You can also verify that you have the latest repo by verifying that you see the weights added to all these images. And there we go. We've just managed to build our first collection, which looks like this. Now let's go ahead and put in our own files. Empty the layers folder like so and go and grab your own artworks. I already have my artworks over here that I want to place in here. Make sure that you do place it underneath the layers folder like shown in the example. Now, next, what we need to do is we need to make sure to rename our config.js, which is sitting in the source folder. Make sure that you have the corresponding folders over here that you have inside the layers. If you don't, this will not work. Let me show you. If you go down here and you run node index.js, you will run into an error, and your error might say no such file in directory. It means that you don't have the corresponding layers. Let's go ahead and add them quickly. I've done this before, so I'm not going to do this. I'm going to quickly do this fast. So we need clothing, and then we also need clothing logo, and then we also need the eyebrows. I'm not going to do everything because I don't want to take too much of your time, but I'm going to put the mouth in there, and let's also put in the eyes maybe. And what else? Maybe the headwear. Just like so. I'm not going to choose all the folders in here. I'm just choosing a little bit of them, but you will usually put in all your files in there. Now let's delete the ones that we don't need because it just makes it easier. So I'm going to delete the eyewear. I don't have that. And then again, I don't have a nose. Let's see how that turns out. I'm just going to remove that one as well. This is an experiment anyway. Let's see, there's about 7 folders. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There we go. If you run the program now, even though you have the correct folder names, it will still break because you don't have any weights. All right. So it's going to try and build, but it's going to fail because it can't find a path to them. So what you want to do is you want to open your folder structure, and to each one you put a weight. How you do that is by putting a star and then your weight. Now, because there's one file in this folder, I can make it 100, I can make it 60, I can also make it 1. It won't matter because that's the only one in there. So I'm going to make it 1. Then in the clothing section, I'm going to go ahead and add maybe, let's say 20. The hoodie is going to be asterisk 30. The shirt, I will put let me make it 100. I want that to show up quite a lot. The vampire cloak's quite rare, so I'm going to make that 2. Then the v-neck, that can be common, maybe 50, and so on. You go and add all your rarities just like this, and you will see that the program finds it very easy to now do the rarity traits for you automatically. I'm going to go ahead and add all of these traits and then come back to you. I am now done with all the rarity weights in the attributes that I've added, and you can see that I haven't even done solid numbers. For instance, I didn't keep this all to 100, everything equaling to 100 and so on. I literally chose whichever rarity weight I wanted to. I did this on purpose so that you guys can see that you can add any rarity weight. Of course, this will make more sense, for instance, if we take a folder like this and we say that the alien clothing logo might show up 15% of the time. The coda might show up 25% of the time. Then we can go into solid numbers such as this one, maybe 50. And then lastly, if we calculate this, so this is already 30, 40, 40 plus 50, and put a 10 over there just to round it off. If you work in a solid round number like this, where I know that each folder is going to exist of 100 roughly, then I know closely to what percentage it might be out of 100, right? But you don't have to stick with that, and that's the amazing ability of this program. Needless to say, if you have done that to all your layers, make sure your config has the correct folders and that the layers here are also correct. Once you're done with that, you can go into your terminal and run node space index.js. Once you do that, you can see your collection should just start creating, and there we go. There's the collection. I hope you guys enjoyed this so very much. I was super excited to do this. Remember to go and leave this repo over there a star and also a like. I don't know how you like it, but maybe fork it or something. But you can go ahead and do that. I will see you guys in the next video. Please leave your comments in the description what you will see, what you want to see actually next happening to this program. My next goal is to make this even more simple for you guys to use and maybe some level of control on certain attributes. Have an amazing day, guys.